Good evening. I want to start tonight with a sentence that is doing a lot of work. It's a sentence spoken plainly, almost casually, but it lands with the weight of a structural beam being moved in a building that's already under stress. French President Emmanuel Macron says that France is now providing roughly two-thirds of the intelligence being shared with Ukraine. Two-thirds. Not a symbolic contribution, not a supplemental role. Two-thirds of the intelligence picture. And the reason, according to Macron, is that the United States has reduced its intelligence sharing. That's the sentence. That's the fact. Everything else tonight is about understanding what that sentence means without adding anything to it. Because when a head of state says something like that out loud, it's not an accident. It's not a throwaway line. It is, in its own way, a map.
Now, intelligence sharing is one of those phrases that sounds abstract until you realize it is among the most concrete forms of support that exists. It is information that tells you where things are, information that tells you when things might happen, information that lets you decide what to do next. When that flow changes, the whole system adjusts around it. Macron's statement does not speculate. It does not accuse. It does not dramatize. It simply describes a new balance. France, he says, has become the primary provider of intelligence to Ukraine, accounting for about two-thirds of what Ukraine is now receiving. That number matters. And it matters not because of what it implies, but because of what it confirms. It confirms that the United States, which had previously been a major source of intelligence for Ukraine, has reduced that role. Macron does not say why. He does not say how much it was before. He does not say what happens next. He just says where things stand. And sometimes the most consequential statements are the ones that stop right there. There's a certain quiet clarity in that kind of remark. You can almost hear the pause around it. You can imagine the room where it was said, the people listening, the calculation behind deciding to say it at all. Because once it's said, it's real. Once it's said, allies hear it, adversaries hear it, and Ukraine hears it. The conflict in Ukraine has always been shaped not just by what happens on the battlefield, but by the configuration of support behind the scenes. Weapons are visible, aid packages are announced, but intelligence is different. Intelligence operates in the negative space. You notice it most clearly when it changes. Macron's remarks highlight that change. They point to a shift in Western support arrangements, not in theory, but in practice. France is doing more. The United States is doing less. Those are not judgments. Those are descriptions. And in international affairs, descriptions like that can be as powerful as decisions. There is a tendency, especially in moments like this, to rush ahead, to ask what it means for the future, to guess at motives, to read between the lines. But Macron's statement resists that impulse. It stands on its own. France is now providing about two-thirds of the intelligence to Ukraine. That is the new distribution. And it is happening in the context of a war that is already defined by dependence on shared information. Intelligence is coordination. Intelligence is timing. Intelligence is anticipation. It's the difference between reacting and preparing. When Macron says France has stepped into this role, he is not framing it as a decision point. He is framing it as a condition. This is what is happening now. And there's something almost stark about that. You know, sometimes history doesn't announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it just clears its throat and says, "This is how things are arranged today." One short, emotionally resonant truth sits right at the center of this moment, and it doesn't need decoration. This is where the weight has shifted. That's it. No embellishment, no explanation. Just a recognition that the architecture of support has changed shape. And it's worth sitting with that for a moment. Because intelligence sharing is not just about capacity, it's about trust. It's about who talks to whom. It's about who is in the loop. When one country becomes the primary provider, it becomes a central node.
It becomes indispensable to the flow. Macron's remarks do not say that France sought this role. They do not say that it was planned. They simply say that it is now the case. France is providing about 2/3 of the intelligence support to Ukraine, after the United States reduced its sharing. Those two clauses belong together. They tell a single story. A story about adjustment. A story about redistribution. A story about how support systems adapt when one part changes. And again, there is no speculation here. Just an acknowledgement of the arrangement as it exists. The conflict continues. The support continues. But the proportions have shifted. And in a war where information can shape outcomes, proportions matter. Macron's statement is not long. It does not linger. But it opens a door. It invites us to look closely at how Western support is configured right now, not as a static thing, but as something that moves, something that recalibrates, something that responds to decisions, whether spoken or unspoken. And in saying this out loud, Macron makes the recalibration visible. He puts numbers to it. 2/3. That number is now part of the public record. And once something like that is in the public record, it changes how the moment is understood. There is a kind of gravity to that. A sense that something has been quietly handed over, not as a dramatic gesture, but as a fact. And facts, especially when they involve power and responsibility, have a way of settling into place. This is what is carrying us now. That's the feeling of it. A simple statement, doing serious work. And that brings us to the next part of this story, which is not about what was said, but about what it reveals about the broader pattern of support and coordination surrounding Ukraine. Because this one sentence doesn't stand alone. It's connected to a larger structure, and that structure is shifting. So let's stay right here with what we actually know, because what President Macron described is not an isolated data point. It is a description of a system adjusting itself in real time. France, he says, is now providing about 2/3 of the intelligence support to Ukraine. That statement only exists because something else changed first. The United States reduced its intelligence sharing. That's the sequence. Reduction, then redistribution. And what's striking is how matter-of-fact the description is. No alarm, no justification, just a recognition that the flow of information now runs differently than it did before. Intelligence sharing is not a static agreement. It's not a single pipeline you turn on and off. It's a living arrangement, shaped by decisions, capabilities, and coordination among allies. When Macron speaks about France supplying 2/3 of the intelligence, he is describing France's current position inside that arrangement, primary provider. Those words matter because they indicate scale and centrality. To provide 2/3 means France is now responsible for the majority of what Ukraine is receiving in this category. That does not eliminate other contributors. It does not erase cooperation. But it does establish a center of gravity. And again, Macron does not assign meaning beyond that. He does not say this is temporary. He does not say it is permanent. He simply says it is so. There's something revealing about how plainly this is put. Because in international politics, especially during an active conflict, plainness is often intentional. It signals confidence in the facts themselves. France has stepped into a larger role. That role exists because the United States stepped back. That's not a critique. That's not praise. That's a description of movement. And movements like this rarely happen in isolation. They ripple outward. For Ukraine, the practical reality is that the majority of its intelligence support is now coming from France. That means lines of communication adjust, coordination routines adjust, the rhythm of information flow adjusts. None of that is speculative. That is simply what happens when the source of most information changes. Macron's remarks highlight shifts in Western support arrangements amid the conflict. That phrase, support arrangements, is doing quiet work here. Arrangements imply structure. They imply planning. They imply that multiple actors are involved in sustaining something complex. When one actor changes its level of participation, the arrangement does not disappear. It reshapes itself. France's expanded role is part of that reshaping, and it's notable that this reshaping is being acknowledged publicly. Intelligence relationships are often opaque by design. They are built on discretion. So when a leader openly states who is providing what and in what proportion, it suggests that the reality is already widely understood among the relevant parties. The statement simply brings it into the open. You know, there's a certain kind of honesty in that. Not emotional honesty, structural honesty. This is how the support is actually working right now. That's the tone. The conflict in Ukraine has been marked from the beginning by extensive international involvement. Weapon systems, training, financial aid, and intelligence. All of those elements are interconnected. But intelligence occupies a particular place because it informs everything else. It's the connective tissue. Macron's description doesn't change that role. It clarifies who is carrying more of it at this moment. France, by his account, is carrying most of it. And again, this is not framed as an announcement of policy. It is framed as an observation, which raises an important point about timing. This statement comes at a moment when the conflict is ongoing, and support continues to be recalibrated. Macron is not signaling the start of something new so much as acknowledging that something is already underway. That distinction matters, because acknowledgments are different from declarations. They don't seek permission. They don't invite debate. They simply state what exists, and in doing so, they lock it into a shared understanding. There is a quiet gravity to that. One short, emotionally resonant line captures it perfectly. This is what's holding right now. It doesn't dramatize, it doesn't reassure, it just tells you where the weight is. France's role as the primary intelligence provider also underscores the collective nature of Western support. Even as one country reduces its involvement, another increases it. The arrangement persists. The proportions change, and Macron's remarks highlight that persistence through adaptation. The United States reducing its intelligence sharing does not end intelligence sharing. France providing 2/3 of the intelligence does not mean France is acting alone. It means the system is compensating. And the fact that this compensation is sufficient to be described in fractions tells you something about its scale. 2/3 is not marginal. 2/3 is dominant. It shapes outcomes. It shapes expectations. It shapes responsibility. And yet, the tone remains restrained. Macron does not elevate France's role rhetorically. He does not frame it as heroic. He simply states the contribution. That restraint is part of what makes the statement so revealing, because it suggests that this level of involvement is being treated as functional, not exceptional. This is what is required. This is what is happening. Nothing more is said. Nothing less is implied. The broader Western support structure continues to operate, but it now does so with France at the center of intelligence provision. That is the shift. And shifts like this, once articulated, tend to stabilize. They become the new reference point. People plan around them. They coordinate around them. They become part of the background reality of the conflict. Macron's remarks do not tell us how long this will last. They do not tell us whether the proportions will change again. They simply tell us where things stand today. And in a situation defined by constant movement, knowing where things stand is not trivial. It is grounding. It allows all parties to orient themselves. So when we talk about this moment, we are not talking about a dramatic pivot announced with fanfare. We are talking about a quiet rebalancing acknowledged in plain language. France is now providing about 2/3 of the intelligence to Ukraine. The United States has reduced its sharing. That is the shape of the arrangement. And that shape matters, not because of what it suggests, but because of what it establishes. It establishes responsibility. It establishes centrality. It establishes who is now most deeply embedded in this particular dimension of support. And once established, those things carry weight. They shape how the next decisions are made. They shape how coordination continues. They shape how the conflict is sustained from behind the scenes.
This is how the pieces fit together right now. That's the takeaway. No flourish, no extrapolation. There's a particular moment in any long, unresolved conflict when the most important thing a leader can do is simply describe the present tense. Not to frame it, not to forecast it, just to say clearly, this is where things stand. That is what President Macron did here. By stating that France is now providing about 2/3 of the intelligence support to Ukraine, he placed a marker in time. Not a starting gun, not an ending bell, a marker. This is the arrangement now. And when you hear a statement like that, especially delivered without flourish, it functions as a kind of boundary line. On one side is how things used to work. On the other is how they work today. The United States has reduced its intelligence sharing. France has become the primary provider. Those facts exist together, and they define the current shape of Western intelligence support to Ukraine. What's notable is not just the content of the statement, but the decision to make it public. Because intelligence, by its nature, prefers silence. So when silence is broken, it's usually because clarity itself has become necessary. Macron's remarks do not close the story of the conflict. They do not resolve anything. But they do close a chapter of ambiguity about who is carrying what share of this particular burden. And that matters. It matters because international support is not only about capability, but about acknowledgement. When a leader publicly states a contribution at this scale, it fixes responsibility in place. It says, this is who is doing this work right now. And once that is said, it becomes part of the shared understanding among allies, partners, and observers. There is no exaggeration in the language. 2/3 is a specific proportion. It does not invite interpretation. It does not need clarification. It simply quantifies France's role relative to the whole. And by doing so, it removes uncertainty about where the center of intelligence support currently lies. France is at that center. The United States, by reducing its sharing, is no longer occupying the same position it once did. That shift is neither celebrated nor lamented in Macron's statement. It is acknowledged. And acknowledgement, especially in matters of security and coordination, is a powerful act, because it allows systems to align around reality rather than assumption. This is especially important in a conflict that relies so heavily on cooperation. Ukraine's ability to act depends not just on the existence of support, but on its reliability and structure. Knowing who provides the majority of intelligence support informs planning. It informs coordination. It informs expectations. Macron's remarks give that knowledge a public anchor. You know, there's a kind of steadiness in that. A sense that even amid uncertainty, some things can be clearly named. One short line captures the emotional center of this moment without adding anything to it. This is the ground we're standing on. That's all it is. No promise, no warning, just a statement of footing. The broader Western support arrangement continues. Nothing in Macron's remarks suggests otherwise, but the configuration within that arrangement has adjusted. And by stating it plainly, Macron effectively closes the question of whether that adjustment is happening. It is happening. France is providing about 2/3 of the intelligence. That is the fact. There is also something quietly consequential about the absence of commentary beyond that. No elaboration on duration, no explanation of cause. The United States reduced its intelligence sharing. France filled much of that space. Those two sentences contain everything we are meant to know. And in a media environment that often rewards speculation, restraint like this stands out. It keeps the focus on verifiable reality. It keeps the story anchored.
This is not a narrative about intent. It is a narrative about distribution. Who is providing what right now? Macron's statement also functions as a kind of reassurance without saying so explicitly. Not reassurance in the emotional sense, but in the structural sense. It tells Ukraine and everyone watching that intelligence support continues at scale. The reduction by one partner has been met by increased provision from another. The arrangement holds. It has changed shape, but it holds. That continuity matters. And again, this is not inferred. It is contained within the facts themselves. France is now the primary provider. Primary means first. Primary means largest. Primary means central. Those meanings are inherent in the word. Macron does not define them. He relies on their plain understanding. There is a discipline in that. It keeps the statement from becoming a message beyond itself. It remains what it is, an accurate description of the current support dynamic. As we reach the end of this script, it's important to note what is not happening here. There is no declaration of escalation. There is no announcement of withdrawal. There is no attempt to frame this as a turning point. Instead, there is a careful closing of the factual loop. This is the proportion. This is the provider. This is the context. And that is enough. Sometimes, especially in ongoing crises, the most responsible thing is to draw a clean line around the truth as it exists today. Macron did that. By saying France now provides about 2/3 of the intelligence to Ukraine, after the United States reduced its sharing, he set the record straight. He made the invisible visible. He made the implicit explicit. And then he stopped. That stopping matters, because it signals that the statement is complete. There is nothing hidden behind it, nothing waiting to be unveiled. It stands as a factual snapshot. And snapshots like this become reference points. They are how future moments are measured. They are how continuity and change are tracked. So when we step back and look at this, what we see is not drama, but clarity. Not escalation, but articulation. A leader naming the structure as it is, in the middle of an ongoing conflict. And in doing so, offering something rare, a stable fact. This is where we are. That's the closing note. Not an ending to the story itself, but an ending to this telling of it. The facts have been laid out. The proportions have been named. The shift has been acknowledged. And with that, this chapter of understanding comes to rest, ready to be picked up again only when the facts themselves change.